we need to think about a dedicated precinct as being more than just the core or heavy industries that are at the centre of it. There are the support industries that operate operate around that heavy industrial core and whose existence is attributed to that core. So they're there to service it collectively or individually. So the strength of that heavy industrial area lies in the ecology, the industrial ecology of the place. So it has to be, if you think of it as an organism, it needs to be able to grow. It needs its inputs, like, for example, skilled workers. It needs those support industries. Some of those companies will age and go into senescence, and in Kwinana we're seeing that with some quite large companies that have been there for a long time. So the ecosystem has to be able to adapt. Now, for it to be able to adapt to those mega changes that affect some of those companies, and I'll mention some names, as Alcoa, looking like it's going to be closing in Kwinana, Nickel West, the BHP nickel refinery, looking like it's going to be not restarting. We don't have an oil refinery there anymore. So these are fundamental changes. So for the ecosystem to be healthy, it has to be well serviced by that common user infrastructure. That's roads, rail, port, land availability, pipeline corridors, electrical transmission infrastructure. And that has to be kept, that's the arteries. The arteries have to be kept healthy. And so that's someone's role to do. And it's not actually the individual companies in that ecosystem's role to do that. It's, in Kwinana's case, all of those sit with the state government. And all of those are currently constraints on the industrial area. So it's if it was to have a health check, it wouldn't come out so well. So it is very important to keep assessing how well the industrial area is in terms of how conducive it is to business. And there's ways you can measure that and observe it. But it's also so important for those parties that have a role to play, for example, the state government in that critical common user infrastructure. They've got to be kept healthy. The renewal processes need to continue on. And if they don't, say for example, there's a distraction to another industrial area precinct that needs to be developed, things can start to deteriorate. And so what that means is that all of the parties involved need to keep communicating at the high level, at the strategic level, and recognise the state of play. How conducive those types of infrastructure are to the business. Are they constraining the operations of the businesses in the industrial area? Can that be foreseen? And yes, of course it can. And if it is being foreseen, what's being done about it? So in the ecosystem sense, there are many parties, and that includes the local community if there is one nearby. So it's not a fly-in, fly-out kind of arrangement. And Kwinana is certainly has a community around it within 10 to 15 kilometres is kind of the limit. That is, they understand industry. The kids in the schools understand industry and are focused in many ways on the jobs that mum or dad or the auntie or uncle, someone in the family, brother or sister, has worked in the industrial area or does. And so there's aspirations. So that means that the education system, the primary schools, the secondary schools, the universities, TAFEs, they also are part of making that ecosystem healthy, and they must all work together.
So in Kwinana, who is driving that? We referenced the state government. I mean, most of these initiatives are led by individual organisations working together voluntarily. But I understand is that we do have this large collaboration across the Hunter Valley. What actually untaps and unlocks the value in that collaboration and makes it multiply?
In some ways that's a really easy answer, but the implementation, in an academic sense, but in the implementation of it's actually quite difficult. So the answer is to have, and I think it's missing here in the Hunter, it's certainly missing in Kwinana, although it was tried to be rectified, but it failed. So there's some lessons I can bring to this for you to make decisions about. So if we look at it in the sense that we've got the federal government making policy decisions and possibly providing grants to selected recipients, we've got the state government doing similar things, but probably more likely to be in control of the common user infrastructure, and the local governments around development application planning and local roads and communities and so forth. There's the Hunter Joint Organisation. There's several other organisations that I've heard of since I've been here and in advance of coming here, and they're all operating very well. There's a lot of motivated people I've seen talked to so far. I'm really impressed with that. But unless they can come together at a high level to work out what are the few, start with a few, what are the few areas of common interest that if they are fixed, what does that do for the industrial area development? What does it do for the ecosystem? At the moment, I don't yet see where that's occurring, but unless those bodies can come together, all of them, if they've got a role to play, and that includes where there's a private development to the scale of 10,000 hectares, that's not insignificant. The key players, if they can be agreeing what are the small number of key aspects to be improved on, to be worked on together to get resolved, and once that happens, it builds on itself. When you've got positive solution-finding people sitting around a table working on a reasonable number of issues to get them resolved, that collaboration begets further collaboration, and it begets solutions. This is what happened at Kwinana when the Industries Council was formed. It was formed because the state government regulators in '91 said, we need you all to be, all the major companies in there, to be doing air quality monitoring, each in this area where there was a township. The companies got together and said, well, okay, fine. How about you tell us how many monitoring stations do you want us to put in, and what you want us to monitor? So the regulator said 4 and measure sulphur dioxide. That's how Kwinana Industries Council got started, working with the regulator, and the companies decided, well, if that's the case, we will form an association, we will raise some fees, we have to have a board. That board used to sit around the table once every 2 months, and it's the same thing. People who are solution focused around the table coming up with solutions. And then, when those solutions had been created, additional problems or issues go to the table to be resolved. So it's a self-generating process. But if those common issues aren't identified first to bind that group together, then each goes off and rightly does its own improvement strategies, but they might be quite different. And so that's a unfocused, unlaser-like activity. When you've got the laser-like activity from a whole lot of interested and connected organisations, those who are responsible for making the changes that are needed can't resist that. They fold. I can tell you they fold. Long answer, sorry.
Thank you.